fast. What we're going to talk about today is how to, let's say you've got your website designed, you got it all set up and you're ready to go. How do you then start to move it from Photoshop into Dreamweaver? Now, there is a way that you might see on the internet where Photoshop will actually save everything out for you. That, generally speaking, will work, but not every time. It only works maybe 6 out of 10 times. And then for the, maybe. And then for the other 4 or 5 people, that isn't going to work. So what I'm going to teach you today, this will work for everyone. So this is the way I want you to do it, but I'm not going to say that it's the only way. Please put that down. I want you to play with that. Thank you. I'm not going to say this is the only way to do it. In fact, there are a lot of people who, when they design websites, they don't even put them together like this in Photoshop like I've taught you anyway. I like doing this because it allows me to see my whole design and kind of make decisions based upon that. Some people can design it in pieces and then kind of go from there. I'm not one of those people. I don't like to do that. I want to be able to see the whole design. So now, instead of going back to my old design with the yearbook like I did before, I decided to go with this because this is going to be, again, a little bit more like what you're going to do. So we've got our, I've got my slices. I've kind of got it all set up. What I need to first do, more than anything else, is I need to decide what the width of my web page is. Now, I know I've designed mine a lot wider than what is probably advisable. And the reason why I did that is through some real careful calculations and stuff. If you have a laptop, it will literally go edge to edge, okay, with this. But my content is only really in this second, in the middle part, and you can see I've got a big buffer here and a big buffer there. You know, there's a lot of people who would say it's too big. So just keep that in mind. When I did yours, when I did that template, I think I made it 1,000 pixels wide, I think. Okay, so that's going to be pretty typical. So either way, if I go to my slice select tool, I'm just going to pick, you know, one of my content areas or something like that. And I'm just going to double click here, and I'm at 1250. So definitely a little bit on the high side, but we'll just go with it since I don't want to redesign the whole thing just for the demo. So what I want to do is I want to start with, I've got my Photoshop file here. I'm going to go back into Dreamweaver, and I'm going to make a new site. And that's very important. If you haven't done that already, you definitely do not want to mix this up with your first site, the practice one that we did. If you don't have that splash page available where it opens up and asks you what you want to do, to create a new site, you can just go over here to the Files menu, go to Manage Sites, and then right here you can click on a new site. And we'll call this Final Site, Final Website, and then I have to find out where I want to put it. And you should have already made a final website folder and put your Photoshop file should be there. So I'm going to click on the final website folder and I'm going to choose that, and we'll just hit save and done. And now I can see in a second I've got my design files there and nothing else. And that's really what you should be at right here, is you should have a design files folder and then nothing else. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a new file, and I'm going to create my empty index.html. Done. Now I've got my index.html set up, and I can double click and open it. And here we go. I'm going to go back to Photoshop. Let's start with the header. So what I'm first going to do is I know that I'm 1250 pixels wide because I just double clicked on my slice. And that, you know, any of the slices that go full width. Now the header is actually really complicated. If you look at the way I've designed it, I've got a lot of slices in here. It's going to be a lot of divs. So we're actually just going to set an outer div to kind of contain the header. And then probably Wednesday or Thursday I'll do a demo that's going to show you how we would go about saving the header. But for right now, we're just going to go with an outer div. So I just need to know what the height is. Double click, and the height is 185. So now what I'm going to do is just go into Dreamweaver, and I'm just going to insert a new div right here. We're going to call this the header, and I'm going to click New CSS Rule, just like that, and I click OK. And then I'm just going to go to the box menu, and I'm just going to say my width is 1250, my height is 185 pixels. Plain and simple. Click OK, click OK, and now you can see I've got my header div. Now, this is too big for me to see in here. You guys won't have that problem. The reason why it's so big right now is because I'm hooked up to the projector, and the projector has a lower resolution, a much lower resolution than the monitors. So I'm actually going to back off a little bit here, go to 66%. Now we can see everything. Okay, so I've got to set up. Now I'm going to show you a mistake on purpose here. What's the next div that we have to do that's after the header? Do you remember what the next one is? It's where all my good stuff goes. Content, very good. A lot of people had that one right. So now I'm going to go back, and I really don't need to go to Photoshop. How wide is it? The same width as the header, 1250. How tall is it? It's a trick question. The answer is it depends. It depends on the page. It depends on what's going on, you know, that sort of thing. So really, I don't have a fixed height here with the content div. But I'm going to put one in anyway just to kind of give me some space, and then we can change that later. So I'm going to go back to Dreamweaver. I don't even need to be in Photoshop, really, to set up my content div. And I'm just going to hit Insert a New Div Tag. Now, I'm making a mistake here. You'll see what happens in just a second. So now I'm going to call it Content. Click New CSS Rule. That's the key. You have to set up the new CSS, okay, the new rules, the width, the height, all that good stuff for the div. If you just click OK, it's just going to make a generic div in there, and it's not going to have any settings, which is not going to help you. So I got to click that, and then I'm going to click OK. Now I'm going to go in here, my box. My width is 1250, and for this, just to start off, we're going to start the height at 450 pixels. And then we'll delete that once we start getting some content in there. There's also a way that you can set what they call a minimum height. So I can set a min height for a div, basically, so that it will never be smaller than a certain amount. So if you have just one sentence in a page, it'll still be a minimum height, which is actually really kind of nice. If we get a chance and some time, I'll show you how to set that. It's really easy. The problem with that is I don't think it's anywhere in the... it's not in here. You have to do it by hand. Yeah, you got to do it by hand, which kind of stinks. So anyway, so I'm going to click OK, and we're going to see the problem that I've made. Here, click OK and OK. Oh, it didn't do it. Darn, I was expecting it to do it. One of the important things when you create a div is make sure that you've clicked outside the div so that this is not highlighted here, because you do not want to. You can create divs inside divs, which we will want to do eventually, but not now. We want the content div to be below the header div and so on and so forth. So let me just check and make sure I didn't. Oh, I did do that. It's just forcing it. So if you look at the code here, my content div is inside my header. And the reason why that happened is because, if I undo, when I added the div, it was right here in, this is highlighted, so it replaced that. So what you need to do is click out and then add your content div. So click out of the div so it's not highlighted, and we'll add content, click OK, there we go. So then I'm going to click out of here. Oops, we got another problem here. What's going on? Oh, it did it again. That jerk. Fine. Oh, probably because there was a space there. So I'll just paste it in. No big deal. But if you have problems with that, just let me know. Okay, so now I'm going to click out of here, make sure that I've clicked out of the div. And what's the third main div that we need to create? Footer. All right, the footer. Very good. All right, no, that's good. So now I'm going to go back into Photoshop. We know it's going to be 1250 pixels wide, but we need to know how tall. I'm going to take my slice. I'm going to double click it. It's only 60, and I've decided that I want to put text. If you notice my website, I have the header text is actually below the black line. So I actually probably want to go like that, or maybe somewhere in between here. So let's double click, 80, let's go 85. And I'll just ignore the rest. So 85 tall. So then I'm going to go back into Dreamweaver. You're getting the idea here, right? Insert the div. We're going to call it the footer. Click New CSS. Click OK. Box. Width 1250. Height 85. Click OK and OK. Now I've got the footer. So now what we need to do is we need to actually insert what's going to be the background graphics for these. We're going to work with the footer and the content today. We're going to talk about the header later. So here's the major consideration. Okay? Well, there's two major considerations. The first big one is, what's your background and how's your background situated? Okay? Is it one big JPEG that's going to be behind everything? Okay, you have to do something one way, that way. Is it going to be a JPEG that's tiled across the whole page? Okay, now you've got to do it a little differently. Or if it's like the yearbook website that I showed you, where the background can only be a certain size, and you've got to force the website into that size, which is not a good design, really. You want to be flexible if you can. Then that's a third way you have to do it completely. If you have a web page like that, I'll help you. But theoretically, let's just say, for most people's designs, that your background image or color or whatever is going to be separate from the rest of the designs. You're going to do that later, which is what I did with this design. If so, then that's a little easier. We can actually get next, with that, do that very easily. But the big consideration there is if you have like areas where there's transparency, that means right now you're forced into saving all of your graphics as PNGs. If you save them as JPEGs, they're not going to have transparency, which means that your background image is now not going to show up. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So we want to make sure that you think about that before we do this next step. If I go into Photoshop, I just have a solid color here as a background. It's slightly yellow, just to kind of get a sense of what I was going to do. What I actually did, if you remember my website, is I have kind of like a cloth background. Now that background is actually really easy. Let's just go real quickly to it. You can kind of see it's got a nice little texture to it. And you can see that it stays the same. Whereas if I move the browser a little bit, you can see how the graphics of my website actually float over top of it. It's just a simple cloth texture. That background image is tiny. It really is. It's very small and it's tiled. So if I were to go open it in Photoshop here, let's go to my images, background, tiled backgrounds. This is it right here. Just open it up. That's it. That's all the bigger it is. And it's just tiled. But it's seamlessly tiled, so you can't tell that it's tiled. It's a pattern. It's kind of nice. We'll talk more about those later as we get there. So basically the long and short of it is, when I'm saving from Photoshop, I want to save with this background, this little yellow background. I got to save that. I got to turn that off. So you can see what's going to happen here. When I turn that off, you can see the checkerboard, which is what designates in Photoshop that you've got transparency, right? You guys should be used to that. It's only been a whole year. So that means I'm going to turn that off. Now I'm going to save this slice and this slice only for my footer. Now one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that it saves the slice, the image, as the name of the slice that you gave it, or the name that you gave the slice. That's a better sentence. So if I double click on this, it's going to save it as content bottom. You know what? That's not really what it is. It's the footer. So I'm going to call it footer background. Whoops. There we go. My fingers are moving too fast. So I got footer background. Click OK. Now make sure that the slice that you want to save out is selected. And now you're going to go File, Save for Web and Devices. This is really cool. Now I'm just going to scroll down, make sure the slice that I want to save is selected. Make sure that it's set to PNG 24, not PNG 8. but PNG 24. The difference there is the number of colors. PNG 24 is more accurate, it's bigger, but it's better. Do not save it as a GIF or a JPEG, especially if you have transparency. Notice what happened there. My transparency's gone. So in the preview, trust what it's looking like. They built Photoshop so that the preview here is going to show you what it's going to look like. So if I save it right now, you'll notice I'm going to have a white background. I don't want a white background. I want my own background. So I'm going to set it to PNG 24. Boom. Now I'm going to click Save. And now what I'm going to do, let's just go back here, is I'm going to find my websites folder. I'm going to find my first website folder here. And now I'm going to go check these options. I want to save images only. I don't want to save HTML. What do you think is going to happen when I save HTML? What's it going to do if I save the HTML as well? Anybody guess? It's going to save over top of the page that I've already created. Oops. That's not good. So we want just the images. Then, here, where it says slices, I do not want to save all the slices. I mean, it's going to save every single stinking image. I haven't gotten that far yet. I want selected slices. And I'm going to click Save. Now, something cool happens here. Let's go to Dreamweaver and watch. If I wait for a second, oh look, an images folder pops up. Look at that. Photoshop automatically creates an images folder, and we'll start placing all the images inside there. So for right now, I've only got one, but that's okay. Close this here. So now, what do I have to do now to get that image as my background for the footer? Anybody? No, actually no. If I did that, here's the thing, that would work. All of a sudden the image would come into the div and it would probably look good until you tried to type over top of it. And then it would just move the image over because the image wouldn't be a background. So yeah, what you just said is just click and drag. You might want to do that if you wanted like a button there. Okay, a button. We don't want this to be a button. We want this to be a background image so that we can type over top of it. And that's the real key here. So what we have to do is we have to go back to our CSS panel, our Cascade style sheets, where we can set the background for this div. So it's actually really easy. Right over here we have our CSS panel. Open up the style here, and you'll see the three divs that we created. There's our footer. See that? There's our footer right there. And we're just gonna double click on it. Boom. Now it's going to open up our settings for the CSS, and we'll look at that. Background. Well, that makes sense. Click background, click browse, go into the images folder, and we're going to choose our footer background. Right? And now here's what's cool is you can sit there and you can say apply. And now you can kind of see it in real time, make sure that it's working. The other thing that I might do with this is I definitely don't ever want this background to repeat at all. So just because, now I've set my size, so it shouldn't repeat because the image and the div are the same size. But you know what? Just in case, I'll set my repeat to no repeat, and my background position in Y, I'm going to set it to the top. So that if this div ever gets distorted or made bigger, my background image is going to stay pushed to the top and it's never going to repeat. That becomes very handy. If I don't have that, some major mistakes will happen. Watch. I'm going to turn that off. Okay. We'll leave that on. And if the box gets increased, let's say to 200 by accident, you can see that now my background image is repeating. It's tiling. We obviously don't want that. Now, if the box stays the same size as the background image, then it can only fit one in there anyway. It doesn't repeat, so it doesn't matter. But we just want to make sure. So I will say no repeat and top, and there we go. And you can see here that my text is floating above my background image. So I can double click in here and I can just keep typing stuff. Now some of you may say, well, what, Mr. Weisbrod, that looks really stupid because it's off here on the left. I agree with you totally. we have to set our padding so that it pushes the text in and down. We'll deal with that later. For right now, I just want to get these background images in. That'll be a different demonstration. Okay? So we're not going to worry about that yet. Okay. So now, let's do the background for the content div, and then we'll call it a day. All right? And that's not too hard, but let's look at this a little bit closer before we go about just saving it. If I go back to my Photoshop document and I look at my content, okay, here's the thing. The footer is a fixed height. The header is a fixed height. So when you add more stuff to a page, and one page has a bazillion stuff, and another page has 2 things in it, it's that content section that's going to stretch. Okay, so sometimes it's going to be smaller, sometimes it's going to be bigger. Does this make sense? Okay, so now we have to do something special with the background for this div. And that is we have to make it so that it's flexible. If you look at what I did here with the footer and with the header, you'll notice, if I zoom in here, that see these little curves here? I made sure that the curves were done before the footer starts. Or maybe I should say, I made it so that the curve started after the footer starts. Why did I do this? So that this line is straight all the way. And you'll see I did the same thing up top here. See that? The content area, which starts right here, is after the curves. I did that so that what we can do is we can take this slice, this little thin slice that I made right across here. Can you all see it? Little thin slice right there. We can take that slice and we can set that to be the background image. Now watch what happens when I do that. So I'm going to select that slice. And I'm going to go back to Save for Web and Devices. Whoops, I didn't check the name of that slice. Let's check its name. Okay. Content background, perfect. Height is only 10 pixels. That might even be too much. I could do it as 5 pixels, but we'll stick with 10. So I'm going to go Save for Web and Devices. It's going to do its thing and make sure that that's selected. Make sure PNG is selected. Save. Now, here's a big mistake that people will make. They'll sit there and go, oh, I want it to save in the Images folder. So they'll click on the Images folder. Guess what happens when you do that? What's that?
It doesn't save it.
Well, it does, but it makes a new one. It makes a new Images folder. And I literally have had students who've had like 5 or 6 layers deep of the Images folder. And then here's where it gets really messy. They saved out the same background like 3 or 4 times. They've got 3 or 4 versions in it, but they're all kaleidoscoping down into all these different folders. They don't know which one's the best one. And I'm not going to know which one's the best one. So when they start having problems, you know my answer to them is, start over, sorry. So here's the key. Don't click on the Images folder. Just select the main folder for the website. Photoshop will know to put it in the Images folder. Photoshop will do that automatically. It'll look in the folder and go, oh, there's an Images folder. Cool, I'll put it there. So if the Images folder is already made, it won't create a new one. But if you click on the Images folder, it's going to look inside that folder and see that there isn't an Images folder, and it's going to create a new one. And then you will have an image folder inside an image folder, and you can have a mess is really what it ends up being. Okay, so we want to be careful about that. So we're just going to click here, Images only, selected slices only, and save. Now, going to go back in the Dreamweaver, and we're going to set our background for content. So if I set the background for content, double click on the CSS over here in our CSS window, go to background, click on the background image and go to browse. Oh, there it is, content background, nice and simple. Click OK. Now I want you to see what happens. If I say no repeat, okay, and I just hit apply, you can see it. You can see it there. Do you see it? You can see the little slice there. But if I set the repeat to only Y, Now it keeps repeating the same thing, but it goes vertically, and so it all matches up. It looks like it's one graphic, but it's not. This is a really key thing to do when you have an area that you want to be, for lack of a better word, stretchable. You want it to get bigger and then smaller and then bigger and then smaller depending upon the amount of content that's inside that div. You take a little slice of your background and you repeat it vertically, which is the y-axis, and now your content area can be bigger or smaller, and nobody will ever know that's actually one image repeated like 100 times. It's easy to do. You just got to think about it ahead of time. Okay? So now that we've got this, we'll click OK. And what I want to do is just for illustrative purposes, I'm going to click back here, go to my page properties, and I can set a background color, let's say, of just a light gray so that we can see it a little bit better. We'll remove that later, but now you can really see what's going on a little bit nicer. What we have yet to do is put the rest of the images into the header, which is actually going to be a little bit more complicated than you're going to think for multiple reasons. Another, and part of that is because it's the same reason why I used the little slice for the content, is also for loading speed. I could have made it a big fat image and had that repeated. But why? Because then my web page would take 5 times longer to load, because it's taking that image, and if it's fatter, it has to wait to load. 10 pixel image doesn't take long to load at all, and then it repeats, and it looks the same. So being smart about it, if it looks the same but you can do it as smaller, now your customers are happier because they load your website in half the time. They don't have to wait for everything. Does that make sense? Okay, so now there's one other thing that we need to do here, and that is, in my website, I want these divs centered. Does anybody remember how we center a div? It's with the margins. What do we set the margins to? Auto, right. But not the top and the bottom margins, guys. Right, we don't want the top and the bottom margins to be auto, because then, at least not in this design, maybe you would, because then it would push it down. Only left and right. So for each of our divs, we should set the header, all of them. We go to the box, take our margin, uncheck same for all, and we can go right, left, auto, and boom. Now it doesn't show it here, okay, but it will. So then take the it will when you preview in Safari is what I'm trying to say here. Okay, there we go. And our footer, double click, box, auto, apply. Now, if I go and save this, let's see what happens. If I preview in Safari, see, it's sent. You can tell it's centered because it does move a little bit right here. My resolution's so low on this projector that you can't really see it, but you can see it centered. Now, notice our text is all over to the left. We'll deal with that later. But we're going to use padding to push it over so that it doesn't print anywhere beyond this, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? All right, but this is your first step. So, quickly, in review. Guys, hold on just another minute. In review, you're going to make your index.html file. Second, you're going to, using your Photoshop file and your slices as a guide, you're going to make your header, your content, and your footer divisions. You're going to set them up to be the right size. Again, you use your slices as a guide in Photoshop. Just got to remember the numbers, go back and forth. Then, using Save for Web and Devices in Photoshop, one at a time, you'll save out the slices that you want for your background images. If you get to do your content and your footer successfully by the end of the day tomorrow or Wednesday, I'll be very pleased. The header is going to be a lot more complicated because the footer and the content are just one div. Done. The header is probably, in my design, is about 10 or 12 divs. Easy. So we're going to do a whole demo on the header just so that we get it right, because that can get a little confusing. Does that make sense to everybody, though? We got a good sense of what we're doing? All righty then, that's it. We got a little time.